Good afternoon, I'm Char Ward. Welcome to Apples Magazine. Children build knowledge from the familiar, that which is part of their everyday environment. Expanding our curriculum beyond the traditional classroom can provide interesting and meaningful experiences for young children, while respecting and building upon their ethnic and cultural uniqueness. The Community Early Childhood Project in Reggio Emilia, Italy, has developed an art-centered approach to their curriculum, focusing on the community of families and schools. Our guest today, Brenda Fife, Associate Professor and Chairperson of the Department of Education at Webster University in St. Louis, is co-director of a Reggio grant funded by the Danford Foundation. The project involves the study and application of the Reggio Emilia approach into school settings in the St. Louis area. I'm pleased to welcome Brenda Fife to Apples Magazine.
Thank you.
Brenda, why has an early childhood program in a city in Italy received so much national acclaim?
Well, I think probably for a number of reasons. Some people have been attracted to the incredible amount of community support that's given in this city in northern Italy for good early childhood care and education. Others are impressed by the fantastic learning environments that are created for these children in all of the centers, of which there are 20 preschools and about 13 infant toddler centers. Some are fascinated with the integration of the arts in the curriculum. Others with the exciting new roles that teachers are encouraged to play with children as co-learners and researchers, as provocateurs, as some have said. And then probably also because of the incredible amount of family involvement, of parent partnership in this program. All of these things which are aspects of good early childhood programs that we all know about and we've studied and we've tried to put into practice, but I don't think any of us have seen many, if any, places do it quite so well as we've seen it in Reggio Emilia.
It's part of that need for us as professionals to grow to another level.
That's right, and it's a very exciting approach that helps one to continue to grow for higher and higher levels of learning. In fact, the educators in Reggio do prefer us not to refer to them as a model, because that has the connotation of being something that's finished, something that's done. They take the perspective that they're a project, that they're an approach that's growing and changing and dynamic, that this whole process is about learning and going further and going deeper.
The Reggio approach isn't really a new approach. It's been in existence for...
That's right. This is a program that began over 25 years ago in the city in northern Italy, which is a city of about 130,000 people. It was begun by parents who actually built a building and worked together and drew in educators to help them provide a quality program for their children. This is a program that has evolved and it has grown and changed over those years, but it's supported by a national government, for example, that in 1968 already established a national law that supports education for children 3 to 6 years of age, and then in 71 actually supports and subsidizes infant toddler care. The city of Reggio Emilia itself supports these programs to the tune of 12% of the city budget. So it's an entire community that recognizes the critical importance of the early years and the fact that this is something that's a service to families as well as to children. It is considered a kind of social service.
So it's available to all families within the community?
Yes, it is available to all families in the community. However, they are not able to serve all the families. In Reggio Emilia, 95% of the children of the 3 to 6-year-old range are in some form of child care. There's a large number of working parents in that community who need child care. This system provides care for about 50% of those children. It's a large system and it is run by the community, not by the national government, although there's some national subsidy. It's a program that does serve children from about 3 months up to age 6, which is the time when children go into the primary schools in Italy. And It is a system that has infant toddler centers, which serve the children from the infancy period up to 3 years, and then preschool centers for children 3 to 6. But what we're talking about is full day care. There's no distinction, nicely, I like that, there's no distinction between care and education in Reggio Emilia, and that's the way it should be.
So there's really quality programming and quality staffing throughout.
That's right.
There's not a case of paying our cleaning woman more than we pay for child care. It's a valued.
That's right. It is valued. Teachers are supported and are considered integral to the growth of these schools. Teachers are supported by having time out of their work week devoted to professional development activity, to involvement with families. Teachers and parents and community and children are all part of this learning community that are supported by the policies as well as even the physical buildings that give them places to be together, to get away from each other, to enjoy each other.
What about children with special needs? A great deal of our population
Yes.
that our project is serves children with special needs.
Yes, this is something that I'm especially attracted to. Children with special needs are fully integrated into these programs, fully included, as we would refer to today. In fact, children with any kind of identified special need are given first preference for acceptance into these schools. It's a kind of reverse thinking that those children who have the highest risk or the greatest need are the first to be accepted. Usually advisory councils, which are made up of parents and teachers and community members who make policy for each of the schools, set the criteria for who they'll be able to accept and who they'll have to turn away, because they can only serve 50% of the population. And as I said, those who will get in first will be the children with most need, or other kinds of family risk factors would be considered to give them priority.
How does this all fit in with our traditional philosophic and theoretical backgrounds that we have been schooled in?
It's certainly, they have drawn from so many American educators and theorists, and it fits into much of our history of thinking of early works of Dewey. Certainly all of us have studied Piaget. They've drawn from Vygotsky, from Bronfenbrenner, from Bateson, theorists and educators who are looking at the child as someone, and this is their image of the child, as strong and competent and powerful, and therefore doesn't just have needs but has rights, has right to a beautiful and stimulating and safe and warm and comfortable environment. They have a right to experience everything with joy. They have a right to be listened to and to be understood. They have a right to play, as all of us would, who are in early childhood education, would support these premises, but to play and to experiment, to collaborate with other children with joint goals towards investigations and problem solving. Going a little further perhaps than some of us have done is that they have the right to be researchers, to express theories, to follow those lines of thought, to not only solve problems but to formulate problems. And one other piece of all of this is that built into it, children are looked at as both individuals, but only as individuals in relationship to other individuals, in relationship to their peers, in relationship to teachers and to parents, and in their relationships within the community. So that that's a very interesting and somewhat different perspective for us to think about, in that we tend to focus on the individual child almost to the exclusion of looking at that child within the group. They focus perhaps even more on the development of the group, but looking at the individual within the group. It's sort of a different point to
really
start.
Laying some foundations for cooperative learning that can really be enriched all the way through a child's experience.
Cooperative learning, as well as just, which is of course part of it, is learning to consider other people's perspectives. Not only do teachers listen extremely well and carefully to what children say, but they know how to support children in listening to other children. and understanding other points of view as well as adult points of view. This can usually be done best in a small group context with 2, 3, or 4, 5 at the most children. And this is one of the cornerstones of the approach, is the emphasis on the small group. Almost more emphasis on that than even just the one-on-one and individualized approach, although all forms of interaction take place in individual, small group, and large group.
Mm-hmm. We have some slides that you've brought along that really can give the audience an idea of what it looks like in Reggio Emilia, Italy, and a little bit more about the kinds of things that we will be seeing and we'll refer back to later on.
Okay. Yes, this is such a marvelously visual program that it's hard to talk about it without seeing some images. Our first image is looking just down at the city of Reggio Emilia, and we see that it's a city with lots of older buildings. It's a city that's bustling with lots of life and activity. If we can move to the next slide. This is the city square, where every Tuesday and Friday there's a market that takes place. The squares of the city, of course, are places that facilitate communication and interaction. And I'm showing you these slides because these aspects of the city, of the community life, are played out in the learning environments of the schools. Now we're moving towards one of the centers. This is an asilo nido called Arcobolina. This is a center for infants and toddlers that serves those children up to age 3. And it is in all of these schools, although you can't tell from the picture, are placed within the full view of the public, as Leila Gandini, who is an official liaison between the U.S. and Reggio, has told us that these schools are intended to be visible and to be connected in every possible way to the life of the community. So they're physically placed in areas that give them that connection. The next slide you're seeing is moving towards an entry point in an infant-toddler center. Here what you can see is the connection between home and school that's intentionally built in with home-like furniture, soft touches, comfortable, warm place for parents and children to enter the school and make a transition from home to school. Typically, there's also walking up to the central commons area, one would also see an entry, which I don't have a slide of, showing lots of information displayed about the life of the school, information about teachers who are the people who are working in the school with children, about projects that are going on, about parent activities and opportunities for involvement. This slide and the next one, this also shows that commons area, though, that is a significant feature of all of the schools. It's designed as a place that really reflects the city square, the piazza that we looked at a minute ago, that facilitates encounters and communication. It's usually centrally located. It's a larger open space that can accommodate a variety of activity as well, in that it can be for large motor activity for children. It can be a space where teachers gather, where parents gather, where community meetings can happen. And those common spaces are oftentimes connected to an interior garden that's walled whenever possible in glass to allow natural light to pour in, to feel a connection with nature. This is another part of the organic aspects of these environments that makes it quite lovely and peaceful and gives it a serene kind of feeling that I'm convinced has a powerful effect on children and all those who are in those learning communities. Here again is an example of a dining room scene. Every school has a dining room that is set up in a very homey look with tablecloths, with decor on walls or shelves that makes it look like a home type arrangement. Again, the use of natural lighting whenever possible. Every detail is considered. Here, the next slide that we're going to look at is looking at bathrooms in Reggio Emilia. There's no insignificant space in these environments. Bathrooms are designed to help children do a number of things. That it can help them look at themselves, in different ways through the use and placement of mirrors. Of course, it's for purposes of self-help, but it can be used for experiments with water. The sinks are usually designed so that this can be, since it is a natural place for water to be accessible, they can do water play experiments in these areas.
I'm sure there was a groan in our audience
yes,
when people saw that lovely bathroom.
And each and every bathroom looks quite different, and they're equally lovely. Interesting. This is, next slide is an example of again, the use of light and the connection with nature. Oftentimes materials that children use in their investigations are transparent and translucent, and then they'll be displayed in ways that allow a different kind of perspective to be shared, for light to pour in and color to be looked at in a different way, and texture. Usually off of the commons area, or branch off the classrooms. In a infant toddler center, there would be a classroom for the younger infants, one for the toddlers, one for older toddlers, and for twos. In the preschools, there will be a classroom for 3-year-olds, one for 4s, and one for 5s. Those are the homes, the home kind of settings for these children. And they are very interesting spaces, very carefully designed. Again, every aspect of it given great consideration in terms of how they facilitate and support children in their interactions with each other, with materials, to support them in their needs, for example, with a sociodramatic play. Beautiful use of mirrors in these environments. In that particular slide, I think it's fascinating it would be fascinating for me to play and pretend at that table,
yes,
and be able to see myself at the same time, how much that can add to the creativity of a child's play. Block building area. These are areas, of course, that are common to good early childhood programs in the States. Sometimes we see some going a little further with added detail and interesting props and resources. Dramatic play, of course. This is a slide that you can't perhaps see very, very well, but it's a structure that is 2 half circles put together, which actually provide a kind of private space for children to get away, yet contain the props and the clothing for dramatic play. And these were built by parents, just to give one little example, throw in about the family involvement. A lot of the unique and interesting materials and equipment and in these environments are designed and created. They're not packaged and purchased, but a need is felt, a problem is posed, and people come together to deal with it. Yeah.
So it's very personalized.
Yes.
And I'm sure some of our audience have concerns about the financial part of it. The funding is a community funding, but you did say that there was participation in creating materials.
Parents will contribute oftentimes materials that are used, as earlier you mentioned, the integration of arts in the curriculum. A lot of found materials, a lot of donated and recycled paper, and pencils are, I'm not sure about paints, but lots of those kinds of materials can be donated. But equipment, as I said, and the materials for that equipment are oftentimes donated by families or through some kind of project that they might do. Money is gathered to support those projects. One particular space that's important and is very key to these programs is the Atelier, which is, I believe, the French word for art laboratory or studio. Every center has an atelier, which is a laboratory, oftentimes for project work. It's a place where wonderful, beautiful materials are found for children to explore freely and to experiment with and play with in order to gain what might be referred from Piaget as physical knowledge of those materials, learning how to use clay, learning how to use paper and paint. But then it's, once children have gained a lot of expertise and through their experimentation and play with these materials, they can then use them to represent ideas which come out of their project studies. So here's another example of a view from the Atelier, which connects it through windows to the playground and outside with nature. The Atelier is supported by an additional staff person who is called the Atelierista. The Atelierista is ordinarily an art educator who is, there's one Atelierista for each school in the preschools, and that person is responsible for working with children and with teachers in helping them to integrate, we might say integrate the arts. They would say use 100 languages. What they are focused on is the idea that children and all of us actually can construct and make sense out of our world and communicate in many, many, many different ways. And unfortunately, we tend to zoom in our traditional ways on just a few of those languages, which might be the traditional oral and written forms of communication. Here, children's expression through music and movement and dance and clay and paint and collage and construction, all of those, and puppets and so forth, all of those can be developed when one gets strong expertise in the use of them as languages, because they help us communicate. And so in these programs, the Atelier and the Atelierista support the development of the 100 languages of children.
Who else would be on the typical faculty or staff?
Okay. Every classroom has 2 teachers who are co-teachers, not a lead teacher and an assistant teacher, but co-teachers on the same level.
How many children would be in a class?
In a preschool age classroom, typically 25 children to 2 teachers. Now, one has to remember there's an Atelierista who's floating, and the interesting part is that all of the members of this community, which includes the cooks, the maintenance people, are all actively involved with children in these schools, and in fact are there during the day, during the time that the children are there. Also built into their work week is some professional development opportunity along with teachers to grow in their understanding of young children, to be informed and to be involved whenever appropriate and possible in project studies. And so there are a lot of additional adults. On the other hand, one of the concerns of Reggio Emilia is that sometimes we put too many adults in environments with children because they value so much and recognize the value of the social context of learning and children's need to interact with other children and consider other children's perspectives. Their research tells them that oftentimes too many adults in an environment distract children from focusing on ideas and accepting the adult authority's word rather than questioning and probing and wondering and challenging another point of view. So the next slide that we might want to look at is one of some infants in a center that is an interesting space that supports, even from that young age, places for children to come together to communicate in nonverbal or verbal ways, to be away from the group or to be with another person. The next few slides get into what happens in these schools. What happens there is a lot of the same kind of thing that happens here, but going in some different directions and a little further. You see play with materials, construction materials. You see experimentation going on. In this case, it happened to be related to a project study, which is a long-term study, related to children's desire to construct an amusement park for birds in their playground. And one of the things they wanted to do was set up some fountains, and so they experimented with how water flowed and how to really construct fountains. Other times, children might be involved in looking at measurements and weights. Typically, these kinds of things are integrated within a study of some sort. For example, one study that evolved into a project for young children that I heard about when I went, one of the times I visited in Reggio, was one about the construction of a table. The children had a particular table that had broken and fallen apart, and the teachers in Reggio have learned to do this, and there's a metaphor that's used by the Reggio teachers, to toss, when a problem is posed, or if a child tosses you a problem, and the metaphor is that the child tosses you a ball, then you need to learn to know how to toss that ball back in a way that'll engage the child in wanting to continue to play the game with you. So for the example of the table that broke down, the teachers tossed that problem back to the children. Well, what can we do to deal with this problem? What do you want? And the children wanted another table exactly like that table. Well, that led to a project that involved the children in developing some systems of measurement and communication to a carpenter who could build them a table just like that. And it's a long, long story, and it went on for many months. But that's an example of how children are involved in solving problems and formulating problems and in sharing problems with teachers. Some of the next slides that we could look at children's involvement with materials in studying them and playing with them, in this case clay, to gain physical knowledge of it and then later be able to represent ideas. We see some more. There were other projects in Reggio, one that is written in a book that we'll refer to later, of the dinosaur project, and here are a couple of examples of dinosaur sculptures that came from long-term study of dinosaurs. And what's not so important is the end product, is that when you study these things, you understand the thinking and the depth of knowledge that children have gained. And as you study them over time, and as children revisit these constructions and these representations of their ideas, then one can understand the process and how children are thinking. Here's just some more examples of clay sculptures. This happens to be one of representing a collage of materials that were studied and carefully put together to look at the colors and textures of fall. Another is an example of paper as a material or as a language. Just sometimes limiting materials to one kind of material can help a child really focus in this case, just white paper, and exploring the many different ways one can make it do what you want it to do. The next few slides get into the project approach, which is very well developed in Reggio Emilia. We've learned a lot about this through some of the works of Lillian Katz and Sylvia Chard. And this is an example of a study that had to do with the rooms of a home and the functions of each of those rooms. And over a long period of time, which involved children's visiting and exploring, cycling back into perhaps drawing ideas about rooms, constructing those objects and the materials and placing them in rooms, children grew in their depth of knowledge about what are homes like. And this is just one example of a culminating project.
So I know that teachers are saying, my children could never do anything like that, but we need to remember that this is not something that's just happening over a period of a week or
Exactly.
two.
Well, the very different perspective on time is taken in this approach. Children are not rushed through an activity where they, in 15 minutes, had to construct something like this. This might be something, this example you just saw, of something they might have come back to over a period of weeks or months to construct and to keep revisiting and keep adding detail. So it's not an overnight kind of accomplishment. The other thing to know is that these children are in these schools for long periods of time, typically at least 3 years. Of course, in this city in Reggio Emilia, they're not dealing with the kinds of mobility issues that we have in large cities with children moving in and out. But they also build in a supportive structure that allows those children who do stay, and in their situation most of them do, to stay with the same group of peers and the same teachers for 3 years. So the teachers rotate with the children for a period of 3 years. That allows them to build the kinds of relationships that are needed with their peers and with their teachers, and through ongoing and long-term experiences like this, to come to this kind of depth of knowledge and sophistication of learning, all of which is supported by the whole system.
Where we set up the easel here and the blocks here, and then in the 45 minutes it's time to go and do something else, and we wonder why children spend 5 seconds whipping out something at the easel and go to
Right.
something else.
Right. The blocks of time that are given for children to stay with something are much longer typically, although there are certainly some schools here that are moving in that direction and already doing a lot of the larger blocks of time. Children there will typically come into the school somewhere between 7:30 and 9 and engage in choice activity around the room. And teachers are greeting parents at that time, talking with parents for important moments of communication that are not necessarily formal, but informal and ongoing. At 9, the children, and this is in the preschools, will typically gather for a group meeting that is focused on engaging children in building a sense of community, in paying attention to who's there and who's not there, to wonder why, to talk about caring behavior that might help that person who's not there to feel better if they're sick or to feel connected when they come back. Then it quickly moves on to plans for the day. What are people going to do in the morning, which is going to last for at least a 2.5 hour period. Maybe it's connected to a project study. It may just be an independent playing with blocks or moving to some table with games or playing in the dramatic play area. So although a lot of emphasis and focus is put on the project studies when people talk about Reggio Emilia, they are just one of many things that are going on. And typically a project study does not involve all of the children. It can at points in time, but oftentimes the core is a small group of children who are working together, because once you get too many children together, they can't possibly listen to each other's ideas. You're setting yourself up for failure if you try to do that.
So how many children might be involved in a typical project involving 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds?
Oh, what I'm informed of is typically anywhere from 2 to 5. 4 and 5, depending on the age of the children. The younger the child, probably the smaller the number of children. Even at 2, a size of 2 is in a partnership is very helpful for the younger child as they're beginning. And this is, I think, something that we need to pay attention to. When our children are not used to collaborating and listening to each other, we've got to start out probably with smaller and smaller groups until they're able to add on a few numbers, but typically not more than about 5.
The ideas for the projects come from the children, the adults, or both?
Both, actually. They can come from the children, and of course teachers there are so carefully listening to what children are saying, watching what they're doing, and they're helping themselves to do this by audio taping what children say, later listening to those audio tapes or transcribing those audio tapes, not necessarily every word that children say, but trying to get at some of the significant conversations. That helps teachers to bring children back to their own questions, to their own ideas. They're also photographing what's happening in the process. They're collecting these kinds of documentation, as they refer to study what children are thinking and to help them to determine how to take children forward in answering their own questions, how to design and let the curriculum emerge, if you would.
So maybe this is a good time maybe to talk about the teacher's role in the curriculum and how that all fits in.
We have a few more slides we could just quickly look through. Just a few more images. Here we see some children painting at a light table. Light table is a very interesting piece of equipment that gives a visual perspective that you don't get in other situations to your painting or your drawing. This is an example of a project you asked where they start of children who were fascinated with GoBots and the aggressive play of some of these creatures, and parents and teachers were concerned, and so they decided to follow that as a project, and were able to redirect children in engaging in other kinds of creative thinking about the life of these people and their environments. We can go on. More and more, this is a mural that was done as a collaborative, culminating piece of a study of poppies in the field, which grow wild, of course, everywhere in northern Italy. What's interesting, we can talk now about the the ways that teachers support this kind of collaborative work as well as the individual exploration. For example, in the fields in the poppies, in that situation, there's a video, by the way, on the resource list that, that gives more information about that kind of study, and also a chapter in the book. But after many opportunities to explore, to talk about, to feel, to question, to hypothesize, to wonder and then investigate everything they could think of about poppies, and to cycle into drawing them and painting them, because every time one draws and paints or represents in any way, one has to organize your thoughts and go deeper and construct knowledge. And so this is the idea of the cycles of representation that are encouraged. But the point is, when the children finished that project, they decided to do a large mural, and teachers supported them in a true collaborative sense by helping them to discuss in advance what their goals were, what they really wanted to accomplish in this mural before anyone ever touched the paper, to plan and think through who was going to do what pieces, who was going to paint which parts of the mural, how they would be spatially arranged, and they might do that by doing pieces of them and laying them out and organizing them so that they're not just jumping in and everybody drawing something on a common piece of paper that comes out into a bunch of individual drawings. It takes a lot of different kind of support and planning to actually get help children, support them in reaching group goals. So that was one example. The other role of teachers as researchers and documenters of what's going on with children can be shown in these last few slides, if we want to take a look at them. This is an example of some documentation collected on a study of dance. Here, teachers had collected photographs, which actually were a kind of stimulus probably for this project, as children were talking about and reading about and looking at and sometimes going to a dance performance. You see examples of the drawings that children have done of dance positions, that by so doing, the children gained deeper understanding of positioning in dance. Some of the clay sculptures. Other forms of documentation that are shown here are some of the photographs of what is being studied, or photographs of what the children are doing in process that may be put in place or in juxtaposition to transcripted dialogues that came from the audio taping of what children were saying while they were in the process of doing what they were doing, combined with some of the actual products of their work, the constructions or the drawings or the paintings that children were doing. When all of these things are put together, teachers can look with much greater ability at the thinking of a child. They can study it, they can analyze it. They also present these kinds of displays and documentation to parents to not only inform them, but to study them with the parents, to engage and participate with parents as co-learners in uncovering what's going on in the mind of a child, which then helps them to understand what we can do tomorrow or the next day to ask a question that'll take them a little further with that idea, or to provide some resource that will provoke them to think about it in another way, or to take them on a field trip that might expand that knowledge base.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more about this listening to the child.
Yes.
And how we do that within our classrooms.
Okay. That's something I'm learning so much more about and find so exciting that, and many of the teachers in the project that I've been working in have commented that what it requires is slowing down to the time and pacing of children, slowing down to listen to what they're saying, what they're doing, to try to get into their heads. And that can be done, as I said, and supported when you're new at it, and even when you're an old hat at it, by audio taping, because you can't always take in everything you hear at the moment it happens. but by coming back to it, and this is kind of a concept at Reggio of circularity and revisiting and coming back on things, to come back to it and try to understand it, to take note of some important questions or concepts that children are dealing with that are coming from them, so that you can, at another moment in time, bring that idea back to the child and say, do you remember what you said yesterday? Or so-and-so said this, how does that relate to what you're saying now? Or do you remember, in showing a visual image of the photograph, look what you were doing there. How does that relate to this? And those sorts of things are done to help children to listen to themselves, to other people's perspectives, and all of those techniques, of course, support teachers in their ability to listen and pay attention. And it's a liberating kind of thing. It really is.
So teachers are constantly doing a lot of reflection, not only of what the children are doing, but what they are doing themselves.
Exactly.
We talked a little bit about staff development. This must require a lot of time for teachers to be working together. How is that facilitated?
Yes, and I think here's another place where we can either say, well, we can't do that, or we can say, well, no wonder they can do this. They have, out of their work week is about 6 hours of their work week is devoted to professional development activity and parent involvement. So they're not asking teachers to add on, to burn themselves out in doing this in the overtime. It's so valued as part of the learning process for children and for teachers and parents and community that it's built into the work week. And they've been able to find the financial resources to do that, to free teachers up 6 hours a week from being with children, to be able to study this kind of documentation, to plan and to collectively reflect with other teachers and with parents what their understanding is happening with children, and to go forward with that.
We don't even have a lot of experience in just talking to the individuals next door or down the hall.
That's right.
That time is not valued for us.
Yes, and it's we're also our traditional systems don't support, or actually go against the support of teachers working together. Teachers are often isolated in individual classrooms, one teacher and one group of children. We're struggling with this in our project because we're trying to involve kindergarten teachers and first and second grade teachers who traditionally are the only adult in the classroom. Many of them have found ways to, in more significant ways, involve parents when they're available in the classroom as partners in that process. But we really need to work within the system to promote change towards co-teaching. And I think that's the cornerstone of this kind of program that Reggio promotes, this collaboration on every level. In order to encourage children and support them in their collaboration, they need to have it modeled. It needs to be happening at the adult level as well.
So you have to understand it at your level with your colleagues and all the way down the line. With the emphasis in our program on parent involvement, and you've talked a little bit about parents being involved, how are the parents valued in the program? How do they participate? Well,
actually, in rereading the book, The 100 Languages of Children, I was noticing a quote that said that families are considered just as significant and just as important in the whole learning community as children and teachers. They are fully involved and are given many, many options for involvement, so that, and actually ways to be involved are created. It's a bottom-up approach to respond to the interests of families. There are everything from opportunities in group meetings to be informed about curriculum, about a project study that's ongoing, to involve teachers, parents in ways that involve them as a learner, to study that, as I mentioned earlier. There are other kinds of meetings in small group and larger group opportunities to deal with parent common concerns and questions of parents, like if a group of parents started talking about sibling rivalry as an example. teachers might have having listened well to parents as they do to children, taken note of that and organize a program where they might have a speaker. Things that we might commonly do, but it's done to a different extent. I have to give an example. When I was in Reggio the first time, I was trying to pin Carlina Rinaldi, who's a pedagogista being an educational consultant for the schools. I was trying to pin her down about parent involvement, and I asked, how many meetings have you had this year, parent meetings? And the answer is always, it depends, and it's such a wonderful response, because everything they do always depends on the history, the context, the situation, the families, the particular circumstances, what they know in general about children and families. But they take the complexity of any given problem or situation and weigh those factors and then come up with an answer. But when I still pressed her for how many, I said, well, how many up until this point in time? And it was, I think, the end of April. And they had had at least 25 meetings at that point in time. So the numbers tell you something. I think we often have contacts with parents, but the quantity and the kinds, and that doesn't mean 25 meetings with all of their parents. It could have been some small groups of 5 parents, some larger groups. They will also have parent-teacher conferences. They'll also do group conferences, which is interesting. Because of this emphasis on the child in relationship to others, as group members, and the development of the group, that kind of thinking takes you toward the logical next step with parents, in that you want to help parents to come together as small groups, to look at their children as a group, to look at their children in relationship to other children, so that that says that individual parent-teacher conferences are not the only way to go. They can be very appropriate too. But parents involved are one other way is as decision makers. Earlier I mentioned advisory councils. Each school has a council made up of parents, teachers, and community members who set policy, who make administrative decisions for that school. So parents can be elected to those positions and be also on a larger council that serves to oversee the entire system.
So it's a real meaningful involvement of
very
parents.
meaningful, and on many different levels, and there's opportunities for choice to participate in a greater extent or a lesser extent.
What I'm trying to perceive now is how does that fit into what we are looking at doing in the United States, our growth to the next level. You mentioned that this was not a model that's going to fit in, or a cookbook approach. What have you learned just from your project in St. Louis that maybe can help us see what kind of steps we need to take?
Well, we've been working at this. We're into our second year, and we have asked teachers to, in an ongoing way, continuously reflect and analyze their own experience and those of the children. And some of the things that they've told us at the end of a year are that they have to start one step at a time, as most change happens in small increments. We've encouraged teachers to look at the possibilities, look at the many rich aspects of Reggio, but zoom in on one area in particular that you're either comfortable with, that you're excited about, that perhaps is a strong point, not necessarily a weak point in your own teaching, and build on that, study it, examine it, adapt it, experiment with it, reflect on it. And so they're doing that. We're finding that one of their observations is that they do need support, and we're trying to build a system of support for them through monthly large group meetings of the teachers in our project, who can come together during that time period to meet in smaller inquiry groups or peer support groups, focused sometimes on common projects that are being explored in the schools, and sometimes just about ways to adapt their environments, other times about ways to involve families and so forth. And then we have a larger group meeting that we're trying to learn from Reggio how to be responsive and let the curriculum for these meetings emerge. And so we're constantly talking and discussing with them what they're interested in, what they need, what we can do for the group. What's really tough is for teachers to work in this intense collaborative way. It's easier, in fact, for many of our teachers to come together in the large groups of teachers from other schools and talk freely and openly. It's easier to do it in that context sometimes than with your own partner in your classroom, because the intensity of the relationship is so strong and different, and you're laying yourself open to more, I guess, you're more vulnerable in a way to someone you're very close with, and to learn how to argue, how to use conflict in the way Reggio values conflict throughout their program as a source for growth, cognitive conflict and even social conflict. That's one thing that's a big struggle, and we're learning a lot. And it's once you can get through some of that, it's extremely exciting for the teachers, and they feel a new excitement and energy that they haven't felt before.
So a first step might be just looking for those opportunities to collaborate, to encourage administrators to create some time where you are able to do this.
Yeah, time to look at something together, to study something together, to plan for possibilities, which is the idea behind emergent curriculum, not to prescribe and to control, but to examine and look for the possibilities that can emerge and be ready for them. There's a lot of planning that does go into this, but it's a very different kind of planning. And teachers working together can usually stimulate so many more ideas and so many more possibilities that will allow them to support children in the process of construction of knowledge.
What else has been happening throughout our country, United States?
There have been a number of wonderful new publications in the last few years, articles that I believe are in a bibliography that you've distributed. There's a book, The 100 Languages of Children, which has been edited by two Americans, one Italian-American, who have been studying this approach for quite a while, Carolyn Edwards, Leila Gandini, and George Foreman. This book is co-written by some of the Italians and American educators who have studied the approach. It's a fantastic source and our best source of information. There's an exhibit that's been going around the country. We were lucky to have it in St. Louis about a year and a half ago. And this is the catalog to that exhibit. That exhibit is going to be opening, in fact, this coming weekend in San Francisco, and it will continue to go around the country. The exhibit shows examples of the project work of the children in the schools.
I had an opportunity to visit the exhibit when it was in Ohio, and within Illinois, we are now working at bringing the exhibit to Illinois in 1995, so everybody keep an ear open.
It's a fabulous stimulus for all of us, and if you can go back to it many times, it's even better. There have been a number of conferences and continue to be a number of conferences being planned around the country. There's a newsletter that the Merrill Palmer Institute has put together called Innovations, and that is going to be something anyone can subscribe to, and it will keep people in touch with the new developments around the country, U.S. adaptations, and conferences and publications and so forth.
Yeah, and I believe that was in your packet too, so if you want more information on that as well, that might be worth subscribing to. We have heard a lot of talk, in summing this all up, about creating a developmentally appropriate curriculum for young children and serving their needs within the local community. How does this approach fit into what is coming out through NAEYC and other groups?
Yes, that's an interesting question. In fact, in the most recent issue of Innovations, that question is asked of Sue Bredekamp, who is the editor of the document called Developmentally Appropriate Practice. And she has recently visited Reggio, and many people who wrote that position statement, of course, have studied it and see that we may need to rethink some things that we thought we knew about developmentally appropriate practice, but in spirit, it's all there. It's all developmentally appropriate. We're learning how to be better at studying development through the Reggio approach. And so we're uncovering some new things, I think, as we go along.
And enriching maybe our role as a teacher, where we have grown from a maybe hands-off approach to that of, I think they call it a co-participant.
That's right, right. That's an interesting debate of a lot of teachers who say they're using developmentally appropriate practice have moved kind of too far off the end of on the end of the continuum of totally hands-off and non-directive. What we're learning from Reggio Emilia is the value of some not directed but directive, supporting, scaffolding kind of help, intense involvement and co-learning and participating in the learning with children, and at times not hesitating to give direct information when it is supporting children's construction of knowledge or their ability to express an idea or to communicate or investigate something.
Taking children to that next step of development.
Right.
And that goes back to our Vygotsky theory, and it all fits
moving through
in.
the zone of proximal development.
I think the most exciting part has to do with community and that building of relationships among people at all levels in our society when we're facing such a fragmented population, the possibilities for healing within our own environments, that our own communities can be Reggio in looking at the resources.
It's all about reciprocity, relations, community, as you say.
Thank you for joining us, Brenda. If you would like more information about Reggio Emilia, we have some resources at Project Apples. Thank you for joining us. And here's a word from from Monica.
Thank you for watching Apples Magazine. Project Apples is a part of the Illinois Regional Technical Assistance System funded through the Illinois State Board of Education. We appreciate your comments and suggestions, so feel free to contact Project Apples at 1-800-227-7537. Please join us for the next magazine, Wednesday, November 17th, titled Helping Children Manage Their Own Behavior, presented by Daniel Detweiler, a licensed clinical social worker. On behalf of Project Apples staff, this is Monica Brooks thanking you for your participation.